The background of this film is in China, just as the feudal era was ending. It's a human tragedy caused by a distorted love story from the old times. The story unfolds in a dye mill where the owner, Yang, is a cruel and mean-spirited old man. Our male lead, Li, is an orphan adopted by the old landlord. Although they address each other as uncle and nephew, Li is essentially treated as cheap labor. Yang, despite his old age, is unable to bear children and has been wanting a son to inherit the family business. His two previous wives failed to conceive and were tormented to death by his violent temper. Still, Yang is not willing to give up. One day, he spends a considerable sum to buy a new wife, Ju, who is our female lead. At night, Li heard a woman's miserable screams coming from the attic. The following morning, while working in the mule stable, he peered through a small hole in the wooden boards and witnessed his aunt cleaning up an unusual scene. Li had never seen anything like it before. It wasn't until one of the nearby donkeys brayed that he abruptly woke up. In the morning, Jung called Li to go upstairs and ask his aunt to come down to work. He went up the stairs. The first time Li met Ju face to face, perhaps due to his early morning peeping into her bathing, he didn't say much before hastily going downstairs. But Ju found his flustered appearance rather intriguing. It was from that day on that Li's restless heart seemed to be captivated. Hearing Ju's cries of pain and distress at night was heart-wrenching. Early in the morning, Li rushed to the mule stable, and coincidentally, he saw his aunt with disheveled clothes coming in to dig for rope holes. Her body was covered in whip marks and bruises, a sight too horrifying to bear. Ju noticed the small hole in the shed. As she peered inside, her face turned red and her heart raced. She hurriedly fetched a large bundle of straw and blocked it up tightly. Despite some time passing since Ju came into the house, there was no sign of her getting pregnant. Yong was becoming even more cruel to her. Li, filled with anger and hatred, grabbed a knife and rushed upstairs to save her. However, after taking a few steps, he hesitated. Ju, covered in injuries, came down and saw the scars on the stairs and the knife on the chopping board, realizing everything in her heart. Ju knew that she would eventually die at the hands of the old man. She decided to seize the opportunity and take a chance on Li's affection for her. So she went to the water tank, fully aware that Li was peeping from behind the shed. She slowly removed her clothes, shedding both tears of pain and using it as a form of seduction and plea for help. But Li was weak and fearful, avoiding any involvement. One day, while Jung was busy dyeing fabric, Ju directly approached Li and opened up to him. She begged him for help, saying, "If you don't save me..." However, Li remained terrified. Growing up in this dyeing workshop, he never dared to resist and couldn't agree to her request. One night, while Jung was away in the town to fetch medicine, Ju quietly approached Li's room. However, she found the door locked. She was persistent and decided to tease him the next day around noon. She intentionally provoked him and directly embraced Li. Li, a normal man in his 40s who hadn't experienced the company of a woman for a while, couldn't resist this temptation. He succumbed to his desires and engaged in a physical relationship with his niece. The illicit affair between them was like silk dyed in a vat, taking on a seductive and vivid crimson hue. Not long after Ju became pregnant, Jung was excited to become a father, and he rushed to the ancestral shrine to thank the ancestors and pray to the deities, hoping for a son. His wish came true when they had a baby boy. Jung was overjoyed, and Li secretly rejoiced from a distance. One day, while Jung was away in town with their donkey, Li couldn't resist his curiosity and went to check on Ju and the baby. Suddenly, there was a loud noise at the door. Li panicked, quickly dressed, and went outside to investigate. he found that the donkey had returned on its own. Worried, Li went up the hill to search for Jung. Li carried him back home. On their way back, they passed a cliff. Li hesitated, considering whether to throw Jung off the cliff. However, two factors stopped him: his indebtedness to Jung for raising him and his inherent cowardice. The doctor came to diagnose Jung, and it turned out he had suffered a stroke. He was paralyzed from the waist down. This situation allowed Li and Ju to act without any restraint. That night, they consummated their relationship, and the sounds of their passion reached the attic. Jung was infuriated, and he struggled to get up to catch them in the act, but he ended up falling to the ground. When Ju returned to her room to check on Jung, he tripped her, grabbed her by the hair, and began to curse at her. Prior to this, Jung had subjected Ju to various forms of abuse. Ju felt a sense of revenge welling up inside her, so she confessed the truth, openly admitting that Li was the real father of the child. Jung, upon hearing this revelation, turned as pale as a ghost, and he was overcome with despair. Jung tried to strangle the child upon hearing its cries, but upon hearing the cries, Li quickly rushed upstairs. Fortunately, the child was unharmed. Li warned Jung with just a few words and left. However, Jung was not one to accept defeat. One day, while they were sleeping, Jung decided to set the dyeing workshop on fire in an attempt to take them all down with him. Thankfully, the fire didn't spread too much. To prevent Jung from causing more trouble, Li and Jae-yu placed him in a wooden barrel with wheels, and they led a happy life together in the dyeing workshop. While they conducted their affair, the elderly master was suspended from the ceiling, and Jung was trapped inside the wooden barrel in the middle. Over the years, Li's biological son grew up, but he neither laughed nor spoke much. The child ran back home and played by the dyeing pool. Jung was waiting for the right opportunity, planning to push the child into the pool to drown him. However, when the child faced him, he surprisingly spoke. His first words were calling Jung Dad. Jung was taken aback at first, but couldn't help but embrace the child with tears of joy. It was as if he had found the best way to take revenge on Li and Ju. He proudly walked through the streets with the child, having him call out Dad and pointing to Ju as his mother and Li as his older brother. When Li and Ju heard this, they felt a mix of emotions. This night, after their secret meeting, Ju came out of Li's room and coincidentally found the child waiting on the staircase. From that night on, the child often stood outside their door, waiting to witness his mother coming out of the so-called older brother's room. When he saw his mother emerge and angrily pelted the door with a stone, Ju was both shocked and angry. She couldn't help but slap her son in frustration, but then hugged him, shedding tears. On the child's birthday, Jung decided not to expose the affair, fearing it would become a family joke. Li referred to his biological son as "my good brother" and toasted to congratulate him. Watching this excellent family drama unfold before him, Jung couldn't help but wear a satisfied smile. After some time, Ju noticed her menstruation was delayed. She decided to undergo an abortion, which ultimately left her permanently unable to conceive. One day, the young was playing with the child by the dyeing pool. Unfortunately, he accidentally fell into the pool, and the child witnessed his struggles but did not offer any assistance or call for help. Instead, he stood by with a chilling smile, waiting for Ju to return home. By the time Ju returned from her illness, Jung had already drowned. Li was left shocked, thinking it was Ju's doing. During the night, when they were guarding the forest, he vented his anger and accused Ju of being ruthless. However, witnessing Li's pitiful and cowardly appearance, she think that he couldn't help but scold him. All of this unfolded while a child in mourning, wearing funeral clothes and a mourning band, observed from a distance. Ju couldn't remarry, she had to remain chaste. Li had to move out of the dyeing workshop. On the day of the funeral, they had to block the funeral procession's path and lead the mourning, sitting on the paper money-covered road. They realized that they would likely be separated in the future and couldn't help but shed tears. This way, several more years passed. Li continued working in the dyeing workshop during the day and stayed elsewhere at night. He would secretly bring gifts for the mother and her son. As the child grew into a young man, he perhaps grew wiser and started to sense the peculiarities of this taboo relationship. When he looked into Li's eyes, he did so with even more coldness and disdain. This made them both refrain from any further indiscretions within the dyeing workshop. The final story has been twisted in the telling. Naturally, rumors and gossip spread in the village. One day, the young man overheard some idlers at the village entrance discussing his mother and brother's situation. He became enraged, grabbed a knife, and chased after them, but didn't catch them and ended up with a cut himself. He returned to the dye house, and Li, feeling sorry for him, wanted to help bandage the wound. However, little did he know that the young man held a deep grudge against him, and he kicked Li in the face. When Ju came out of the house and saw the situation, he knew that beating one's own father would bring punishment from the heavens. In his desperation, he blurted out the young man's true parentage on the spot. But for a child who had grown up in a gloomy and cold, distorted environment, now telling him the truth is too late. Even though he knows his real father, his heart is still filled with hatred and humiliation. The days in the dye house become increasingly difficult. This business will eventually be the young man's, but he's constantly filled with anger towards the two of them. On this afternoon in the cellar, after their tumultuous encounter, they felt that this was how their lives would end. They might as well just die here and be done with it. When the young man finally arrived, he found the two of them, half naked, in each other's arms, unconscious. His hatred for them grew even stronger. First, he carried his mother back to the room, then he brought out a Li and threw it directly into the dyeing pool. Li suddenly woke up. The young man looked at Li with icy cold eyes, and his thirst for vengeance was not yet quenched. He picked up a nearby piece of firewood and approached slowly. Ju heard the commotion downstairs and struggled to climb out, but the young man paid no attention. He struck with the firewood, turned around, and sent him into the pool. Watching his beloved of several decades meet his end on the spot, and realizing that his son had committed patricide, Ju was overwhelmed by grief and anger. He completely lost any will to live and set the dyeing house ablaze. Decades of grudges and entanglements, ethics and morality were all reduced to ashes. And so, the story ends here. This movie is China's first film to receive an Oscar nomination for Best Foreign Language Film and has also won several awards, including a special prize at the 43rd Cannes Film Festival and the Gold Hugo at the Chicago International Film Festival. The film has a deeply poignant tone, set against the backdrop of the new democratic revolution in 1920, where feudal traditions and moral constraints still held a firm grip on the land. The movie commentary ends here. Remember to click subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Please continue to follow this channel, Cinematic Insights. I'm Jay. Please subscribe and support us. We'll see you next time.